We have a new pope heading into the Vatican, and we also have quite a shakeup happening in the Middle East, as well as some tensions going on further east. I am your host, Sal Assante. This is the We The Patriots Podcast, and today we are going to get into all that and maybe a little bit more. Can't wait to do it, so let's get right into it.
This thing that's in my brain, it keeps me from wanting to go on, but I want some gain. Baby, a little fame.
So I just want to give a shout out to all the mothers. I hope you had a beautiful Mother's Day. I hope that your sons and daughters treated you with the utmost respect, made sure you didn't do anything, laid your feet up. And for all the mothers that had to continue working hard, maybe you're a single mother, we thank you just as much, if not more. I, for one, cannot be more appreciative for my mother for how much she's done for me. And I can only imagine that most of us feel the same out there as well. Yeah, so this episode is going to be, I think, a somewhat interesting one. We'll start off here with the Pope. We'll lead into the rest of the show, kind of talking about some geopolitics that really greatly affect the outlook of the United States. And hope you guys enjoy. I do want to give a shout out to the listeners of the show. I really appreciate all of you subscribing, leaving likes, comments on the shows. I really appreciate it. You are what drives me to continue making this show, although I love doing it for my own sake. You guys make it very, very fun. Fun to engage. I love getting messages from you guys, engaging me on certain topics, much like the Middle East topic that we're going to talk about today. A lot of that comes from multiple people coming to me on the side, so I thank you, and might get a little shout out later as well. But let's start here with the Pope. We have an American Pope. If you have not been following, we did do a show recorded with my friend John very recently and talked a lot about the possible options. There could have been a Filipino pope, could have been an African pope, could have been a back to Europe pope, as has been the kind of the norm in history. And instead, we have an American pope, and not just from the Americas like Pope Francis, who hailed from Argentina, but somebody born in Chicago. Believe it or not, Pope Leo, as he is terming himself, is hailing from Chicago. Now, he did a lot of his missionary work down in Peru, but coming from Chicago, he actually gave his first mass, I believe, in English, which is very, very interesting. And yeah, I can honestly say that I'm pretty excited. I, for one, was pretty against what I think a lot of Catholics, at least Catholics that I see raving about the popes going on. There's a lot of people that weren't too happy with Francis, but I, for one, I liked a lot of what he stood for, a lot of his actions, a lot of what he tried to push the church into. Now, did he still have his problems? Absolutely. Did I agree with Francis on especially the immigration issue? Not really 100%, especially with what's going on in Europe and in a tangential way, what's going on in the United States now. But with all that said, I think that Pope Francis really brought a lot of new people and tried to widen the umbrella of the Catholic Church, which I think is really the job of the Pope. And I think he did a great job at that. And I believe, as it seems so far, now we're very, very newly into the papacy of Pope Leo, but I think that Leo's going to be a good continuation, and I wish him all the best. And of course, we're praying for him. If you're not a Catholic or you couldn't give two shits about the Pope, well, the rest of the show is for you, but for all those who do care, I think that it's going to be very interesting. We did see some very interesting interviews on our side of the possibly brothers. I'm not fully in tune there, but the brother of the Pope saying how he was not a Chicago Cubs fan and in fact was a Chicago White Sox fan. And I believe someone actually dug up some video of Pope Leo back in the 2005 World Series, which featured the White Sox. And I thought that was phenomenal. Really fantastic stuff there. And yeah, we'll get to see a continuation, I think, of Pope Francis. I do not think his legacy is going to go by the wayside. I think Leo's really going to uphold that. And well, as it stands, Pope Leo actually confirmed a lot of the bishops and cardinals underneath Pope Francis. So you can only imagine that there's got to be at least some similarity between the two. And yeah, we'll just have to see. Again, we're very newly into the papacy of Pope Leo, and we will really get a good look, I think, as we continue to see the conflicts across the world, especially in the Middle East, that continue to rage on. But as I talk about that in the Middle East, I think it's very important to bring up what's been going on behind the scenes, especially here with our own president in the United States. President Trump and his administration have really gone through quite a shakeup in their approach to policy in regards to Israel, and I think it's really worth noting here. So we're going to talk about that for a little bit. And this kind of goes back to around 2016 when I was receiving a lot of the information that was coming across to my feed. A lot of it came by the way of memes, by the way of people really spreading what a lot of folks now would call disinformation, misinformation. And that's the way that I received this information about what's been going on in regards to Israel. It was a meme, not necessarily a meme, but a page that clearly is trying to provoke people into engaging. So I had to verify everything, and it turns out that a lot of the claims made by the post that I saw was sent to a good friend of mine and a pretty avid listener, Jason. So I can't thank you enough, Jason. Hope you're listening to this show. Hope you enjoy this show. But Jason sent me this, and it was very fascinating to me. So most of the claims in this meme-like post actually turned out to be true, and we're going to go over some of them right now. So what happened? For those of you that may not be following, and it may be tough to follow, there's a lot of mainstream news that ends up playing in and out of my household that I get to see on a pretty regular basis. And I was curious if I get to see any of this on the mainstream news. And as it stands, it doesn't seem like anybody really wants to report on this, which is interesting. My guess is that this is shaking a lot of people in many different ways, whether they're reporting on the issue, whether they are personally tied to the issue. And reporting on it might make people look bad. And I'm assuming that might be why you don't see someone like a Fox News reporting this very, very market changing policy and direction towards the Middle East and specifically Israel. So what I saw, what was in this post, let me actually get to the meat of this. So there was a lot of claims made. One of the claims being that President Trump had cut off communications with the Prime Minister of Israel, who I think we all know by this point, but goes by the name of Bibi Netanyahu. Now, is this true? It turns out that it actually is true. It does seem like there's quite a few reasons for this, and we're going to go over that. So, what happened? A lot of it seems to stem back to, and I'm not sure if we covered this on the show. I actually think that this might have been a blind spot of the show, so I apologize for not covering it in the moment. But I did think it was a little bit fishy, to say the least. Was this Signal group chat that got what happened here? So I'm going to go over as best I can without rummaging through a whole bunch of reporting. So there was a Signal group chat, and a lot of it talking about geopolitical actions and military and defense actions. And the group chat included people like Pete Hegseth, Vice President Vance, and also the, at the time, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Now, it is alleged that, well, what actually happened was that the group chat got included in the group, unbeknownst to a lot of people in the group, allegedly, was an Atlantic journalist. Now, that journalist goes by the name of Jeffrey Goldberg, and Jeffrey Goldberg was put into this group chat. He got all this information that should not have been put out to anybody in the public, and he basically posted a whole story about it. And now, as we're seeing the revelations come out about this, it turns out that a former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz actually was the one who put in the Atlantic journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, put him into the chat. He's the reasoning for it. That seems to be one of the leading reasons that Trump is not happy with Netanyahu and Waltz in particular. Now, let me talk about Waltz first. Waltz was removed from his position May 1st, I believe, so about a week and a half ago. Now, he's still a part of the administration, which I find interesting, but he is no longer at that post of National Security Advisor. He is now, Waltz is going to be I forget the exact name of it, but the head liaison to the UN. Okay. Now, the connection with Netanyahu. This stuff is not confirmed. From what I can tell, this is not verified information, but what I've been seeing is that there's been a few allegations that there are links between Netanyahu, Israeli intelligence, and Mike Waltz. Now, the accusation seems to be that Mike Waltz was being coaxed or being, we'll say, led on in order to cause a disruption in the Trump administration in regards to this conflict currently that's going on between Israel and Hamas, Israel and the Palestinians. And what it seems like a lot of it had to do with was trying to force the administration, the Trump administration's hand in terms of trying to get them to commit to some sort of military action against Iran. Now, Trump, as can be evidenced by a lot of his public acknowledgments, is not trying to provoke a war with Iran. He's actually trying to do the opposite, trying to come at this conflict in terms of negotiating, diplomatic negotiations. And as I think many of us Americans feel, that would be the better way of going about things. That does not mean that we should be afraid to utilize our military when the time is called for, but in terms of using that as a first option, I think that we're pretty tired of using our military for other people's well being. Pretty tired of it. So, good on Trump, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that you might agree, but I think it's good on Trump. And so it seems like the falling out between Trump, or the somewhat falling out again, Mike Waltz is still a part of the administration. He's just no longer the national security advisor. It seems like the falling out may have stemmed from that Signal group chat leak. Going further than that, it seems like there has been a rift that has been caused, I should say, a rift that has appeared between Trump and Netanyahu, specifically on this Iran attack strategy. Netanyahu has visited the United States multiple times over the past few months. Seems like, and a lot of this is backroom talk, so we are just assuming, but leaks get out, of course, and it seems like what Netanyahu was aiming at was for Trump to commit to strikes against Iran directly, and Trump was getting pretty fed up with that. So at this point, it's being reported as a fact that Trump has cut off communications directly with Netanyahu. He's pretty fed up. He feels like Netanyahu has been disrespectful, and the Israeli government has been disrespectful in treatment of who's claimed to be their greatest ally in the United States. And so Trump has taken some further measures that we're going to talk about here. Number one, dealing with Saudi Arabia and their nuclear deal. And this is regardless of recognition of Israel. This is a pretty important step. Now, one of the major points of like the Abraham Accords and everything that kind of happened in the Middle East in the last term of President Trump, the first term, was that a lot of the peace deals and negotiations were hinging on the Muslim states, the Muslim led states, I guess I would say. I don't know if I'm terming that correctly. It was all hinging on the fact that they would be recognizing Israel and be willing to cooperate with Israel. Now, it is a real leap, a real change in direction to be negotiating with Saudi Arabia without requiring them to directly acknowledge the state of Israel. That's a real change. A lot of our foreign policy coming from the United States in the Middle East over the past, well, since Israel has existed for the past almost 70 years, has hinged on the fact that you need to be acknowledging Israel as a state. And if you're not, then you are an enemy. Then you are going against the wishes of the United States. And going against that, doing something that is so markedly against what our previous stances has been, is really a change in terms of the way that the United States is going to be governing geopolitically. It's fascinating to me. Now, if you've been following along with my critiques and my conversation, my commentary on the wars in the Middle East, and more specifically the Israeli Hamas war, most recently started in 2023, I think that you could gather, and I will plainly state here, that I am not for or against either side here. My biggest fear in the days directly after the attack on October 7th was that Israel would have a response that was unequal to what they received in attack. And as it played out over the next year and a half, where we are now, almost 2 years later, it's pretty clear, I think, to most of the world that Israel has responded in a very unilateral way, a way that has honestly taken away a lot of the goodwill that I think not just the country, but the world was willing to give Israel in terms of being attacked and being able to respond. I think that goodwill is gone. Now, a lot of the goodwill that's built up over the years on behalf of Israel was based off of the Holocaust. Now, that goodwill has, I would say, almost entirely dried up. There was, again, after the October 7th attacks, there was a massive change in the goodwill of the world. But again, everybody was kind of fearing, it seems, everybody in the Western world was fearing a unequal response by Israel, and that unequal response has played out. And I think that the goodwill is gone entirely. I do not think that people really care whether Israel got attacked, whether they were provoked, because their response has been so total and destructive. They just want to see this war come to an end, and it will not come to an end. Ceasefires have been agreed upon and broken in many cases by Israel. Strikes have been made on flat out citizens, schools, places of worship. People are tired of it, I believe. And it kind of bears fruit, especially with the recent response again by President Trump and his administration. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. One fear by a lot of different people is that in messing with Israel, you're messing with someone who, especially in the past, has gone through great lengths in order to take down their enemies. And if President Trump is now putting himself in the position to be an enemy of Israel or to be someone who's going against Israel's wishes, he may be in the crosshairs of some sort of, whether it's a PR campaign against him, a massive press push to go against him, to impeach him, whatnot, or possibly even to have an attack directly on his personhood. There are a lot of fears going around, and I'm not going to lie, I think that I kind of side with that. Trump does need to be careful. There's a lot of people, and I will thank my good friend Jason again for sending me this video. There's a lot of people in our government who are seemingly very loyal to the state of Israel. How do I evidence that? Well, there was a video that got sent to me, and this video was just one of those. I'm sure all of you kind of know one version or another. There's some guy who got famous on probably on TikTok, but he's famous on all sorts of platforms for going up and asking rich people, because the car they drive, what they do for a living, right? Going up and pressing these people, asking questions. He does it in a very friendly way. But there's a lot of people too that just go up and ask people questions, very blunt questions, and stick a camera in their face and make them react. Now, the non-answer, the non-react is very telling in a lot of cases. And in this one in particular, in this case, in this video that I saw, it was very telling. What the direct question was asked to everybody who was asked this was, do you believe that American citizens or America has a higher place in your own personal belief or your own personal voting habits as compared to the state of Israel? And these are American congressmen. All of these people that got asked this question were recipients of APAC money or recipients of Jewish funds in order to get them elected, in order to push their campaigns. And every single one of the people in this video either had a non-answer or was willing to say that Israel is on the same level as Americans. And I think that in doing and committing to this new policy that Trump seems to be committing to, there is a very good chance he's making a lot of enemies up on Capitol Hill. And I think that we have all seen what that could lead to. He did have multiple assassination attempts on his personhood as of about a year ago now. He has been the recipient of a massive legal attack. Many would claim was a political hit from the other side of the aisle. Others would claim that it's somewhat justified, but either way, yeah, there's an opportunity here for people to really, in bad faith, go after President Trump, whether it's legally, whether it is physically. And I do think he needs to be careful. Does that mean that I don't support what he's doing? No, I absolutely do. Again, I'll go back to what I've been bringing up in my coverage of the Israel Hamas war as of late. I really don't think that Israel's response has been justified, and in doing so, the suffering that has been inflicted on the Palestinian people has been very hard to watch, very scary to watch from a, I guess, third person point of view here, where we are not directly involved, and all we get to see is the suffering, of course, of both sides, but at this point, it is almost entirely inflicted on the Palestinian people, and it has been very hard to watch, and I very much hope that the fighting itself can stop and some sort of resolution can be brought forward that makes both sides kind of realize how ridiculous this whole fighting is. If you look back over the past 20 years, I believe there's some sort of war being taken on behalf of Israel and Palestinians, whoever is running either the West Bank or Gaza or both. There's been some sort of war about every 2 to 4 years, and realistically, it has to stop. It is a drain on especially American funds, but anybody who's supporting Israel monetarily, and there's really no need for it. When you're talking about the amount of attacks daily or weekly that Israel receives, you can absolutely make an argument for that. But unilaterally going after the Palestinian people and civilians the way that Israel has over the past, really, since its inception, but we could just narrow the scope and say over the past 20 to 25 years. It's been very hard to watch, especially as we are touted as Israel's number one ally. So, moving forward from that point, I do want to get to the rest of what has been claimed. On this post that I saw, there was also a claim that Trump wants to recognize the Palestinian state. From what I can tell, this does not mean that it's truth, but from what I can tell, there is no verification that that is true. It seems like Trump is not, or the Trump administration at least, is not being forward about recognizing Palestinian state, or guess more broadly, a two-state solution is not being brought forward by Trump. So that seems to be an outlandish claim. However, there was a story that was brought out, I believe, by a European. I don't remember who exactly it was that published this story. They did claim that Trump was going towards the policy, or very possibly could have been going towards the policy of pushing for a two-state solution in the Palestinian area. Again, this hasn't been confirmed. This seems to be one claim that is not true, or at least not entirely true. It'll be interesting to see if he pushes for this. This will definitely create a lot of enemies in terms of, you think of someone like a Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. A lot of their movement has been to push for President Trump, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ben Shapiro and a lot of the people that work with him and for him are very pro-Israel, more pro-Israel than the average American for sure. And that would be interesting. Ben Shapiro was a big, big push for President Trump to win the most recent election. He raised a lot of money and did a lot of very pro-Trump pushes, both on his show and on other opportunities, media-wise, in order to push Trump into the presidency, make arguments on his behalf. It'd be very interesting to see if someone like Ben Shapiro turns on him, because again, you are already looking at the lowest approval rating Trump has ever had, and now it could very well go much further down. Does that mean anything? No, he's already voted in. Will it make it harder for him to get stuff done? Very possibly. You already have although he does have him, more likely the party actually has control of both houses as well as the presidency. You could start to create rifts in those small, small majorities that we have, and we could be in kind of lockstep. Gridlock is more the word. I'm not lockstep. Lockstep would mean they're going together. More like gridlock that kind of occurs, and we could be getting nothing done, which, to be completely fair, in most previous cases of gridlock in the American government, that is when it is the most stable time because nothing is changing. However, I think that with the agenda that Trump is trying to push, both with immigration, with the financial policy, geopolitics is really not too affected unless we're looking for a declaration of war. But in all of these things, you are looking for congressional support. He may be withering away at whatever advantage there might be in the House and Senate. Now, moving forward, there is direct talks now happening between the Trump administration and Iran, which is pretty new. Now, in most cases, there was an intermediary used in order to have conversations. We are seen as adversaries and not allies, of course, when you're talking about the United States and Iran. Now you're talking about direct talks with President Trump as well as Iran. And this is a very, very new development. Again, in a lot of recent testimony, a lot of stories that have been coming out, Netanyahu, as well as a lot of people in the Trump administration, have been pushing for a war with Iran, or at least military action against Iran. And Trump taking the step to now have direct talks, negotiations with Iran that's basically a total 180 on what the previous policy was. And you really wonder what may have been getting said behind closed doors between Netanyahu and Trump. That seems to be very true. There's been quite a bit of reporting on that as well. So when you're looking at the entirety of all this policy, what you're looking at is, again, a very marked change in just how supportive the United States and previous regimes have been of Israel, regardless of party, whether you're talking about Biden, Obama, the Bushes, Clinton. We've all been very, very pro-Israel. And taking this step, or these steps, I should say, that Trump has taken, and the Trump administration, again, it's a total 180, in my opinion. And I think, given what has happened since October 7th and the response to the attacks of October 7th and just how gruesome this war has become, I couldn't be happier. I think, in a way, this was what a lot of people voted for when they voted for Trump. One of the biggest reasons that I think people voted against Kamala, and one of the reasons that she was unable to build a coalition, was that there was a lot of people on leaning far left, or in far left groups, I should say, that really wanted her to take a stronger stance on behalf of the Palestinian cause, and she just couldn't do that. Not to say that Trump got voted in for the Palestinian cause. That's not. That's exactly opposite, actually, to what I'm saying. But there was a lot of people hoping that Trump would follow through on his claims. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. But there were a lot of people that were hoping that he would be able to stop the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israeli-Palestinian war, and any war going around the world, that he'd be able to help negotiate peace deals. And I think that a lot of people did vote for this regardless of how they felt, who started it, who was in the right, any of this. When you're talking about either of the wars, but particularly as we're talking about the Middle East, people were really hoping that Trump would be able to put an end to the fighting here. And it seems like this is a very strong step because, again, with ceasefires being negotiated and broken in most cases by Israel, it's hard to say that negotiating through Israel would have been the best way to get a ceasefire done. If now, I do not think that the Trump administration is going to stop giving aid to Israel. We'll have to see where the proof in the pudding is on that. But if aid is to be lessened, if military cooperation is to be lessened, intelligence cooperation is to be lessened, I think Israel has a very high incentive in order to put an end to this war for real. Not just a ceasefire, but a total stop to this. I really think that this is the new developments are very, very good looking for the outlook of war. Now, one problem to bring up, and I do not want to just give light to the one side of the argument, because there is another very big side of the argument that is the opposite side. Leaving Israel out to dry, if that does happen, if, again, I'll go on what I just said. If aid is lessened or even ceased, if cooperation between the militaries is ceased, if intelligence cooperation is no longer, you are looking at a isolated Israel. And an isolated Israel, in a lot of people's minds, mine included, is a scary state to look at. Why? Well, if you are to trust a lot of reporting on previous wars in the Middle East, which I think you do need to put a caveat on, but if you are to trust it, Israel allegedly has enemies on all sides. Now, what do they term those enemies at this point? It is Muslim-run countries, so you do need to take that with a grain of salt. However, Israel is surrounded by adversaries geographically. Not in no terms am I talking about something that is perceived. It is very real. There are adversaries on almost every side of Israel. If they are left isolated, do they resort to utilizing nuclear weaponry? Do they resort to last stand tactics? These are the things that I think should rightfully scare the rest of the world. This is something to look out for. Again, if there is some isolation being done on behalf of the Trump administration in regards to Israel, we could be looking at a very scary state, one that doesn't simmer down the conflict in the Middle East, but actually ratchets it up. If Trump is going to be doing deals with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, possibly Syria, as their government starts to actually form again after their ousting of their leader. We could be looking at, again, a very isolated geopolitically Israel, and I think we could be looking at a very scary situation in which they may make the argument that they are forced to utilize stronger tactics in order to go after their adversaries. That's a very scary world to predict, and I don't think anybody wants to see that. When you think about the future, think about the possible future of this conflict and other conflicts around the world. Does this cause a broader conflict and going from a regional conflict to a worldwide conflict? It's very possible, right? So you think about the working between Iran and Russia. You think about possible coalitions being built between China, Russia, Iran, different countries in Africa now that are somewhat beholden to China. You can have a very factional piece of the world start to be created, and that is something I think everybody is for avoiding. Now, there may be people that profit from that. There may be people that are looking forward to a worldwide war, but I think we're all well aware that a worldwide war at this point is going to turn nuclear and very deadly very quickly. something that I think most human beings do not want to happen. Now, when you're talking about the leaders of our world and people who really seem to live in a different world than the rest of us, quote unquote normal people, they may not think along the lines of the general populace. They may not think along the lines of trying to solve issues. They may be trying to utilize issues for their own personal gain. And if we get to that point, if we get to, again, a very fractured world and geographical map, a lot of different countries picking sides, unfortunately, at the end of the day, as we've seen two world wars basically start as regional conflict and break down into world war, as we all see, at the end of the day, you have to pick a side. You're going to get involved one way or another. You hope that things don't get that far. I hope that things don't get that far. But we'll have to see. This new tack that Trump is taking, I think, is a much needed one in the sense that we have been one of the lone countries propping up the state of Israel for quite some time now. We've been backing them on almost all of their military operations. And again, when you look at the outsized response to the attacks of October 7th and just how much damage has been caused to Palestinians, to the people that are attempting to resist their homeland being destroyed, I think that America has a large role to play in terms of maybe walking back some of our lockstep ways with Israel. Again, military cooperation, intelligence cooperation may have to be brought back in order to get us to a more stable place in the world. And this is what it takes. If Netanyahu really was pushing hard for this war with Iran for the United States in order to do what I would call their dirty work, I think it would be a very good thing for the United States to take a step back, recognize that we do not need to get dragged into another war in the Middle East, how detrimental that has been with everything that went on in Afghanistan, everything that went on in Iraq, everything that went on realistically with any proxy war that's been fought utilizing Israel or any other country for that matter. It's all been devastating. It has all been not well orchestrated and not in the best interest of the United States itself. I think it would be a very good time for a geopolitical reset on behalf of the United States. Get ourselves out of harm's way. Stop putting ourselves in a position to be attacked on the world stage. And I don't just mean attacked directly on our homeland, but attacked in terms of our image, what we're trying to portray. If we're trying to portray that we are the good guys, we are, for lack of a better word, the policemen of the world. I think constantly stepping on everyone's toes in order to promote Israel is not a great place to be as the world's policeman. And it would be very nice for us to act on our own self interest as a country, a lot more than acting on the self interest of someone like Israel. So that's all I got to say on that. Again, it'd be very interesting to see these developments. It'd be very interesting to see if those claims that I just made come out to be fully true. And not only that, to see if Trump is willing to recognize a Palestinian state, because that would be not only a 180, that would be, I don't know if there's anything further than a 180, but that would be a true 180. That would be the exact opposite of the United States geopolitical policy for decades and decades on end. Now, going into another conflict, which I do not have a ton of information on, and it's interesting because there has been a ceasefire brokered already, so interesting that I'm talking about it, but there was militant operations that have actually culminated in the further east, not quite Middle East, but between India and Pakistan. Those have since, again, allegedly there is a ceasefire agreement. Those have been tensions that have been bubbling up for decades and decades. And it was scary to me to see that more war is being started around the world, having ongoing war in Ukraine and Russia, having an ongoing war in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas, Israel against Palestinian people possibly, and then opening up another front here in India between India and Pakistan. If you're talking about more and more regional conflicts, and of course we know there's still civil war going on in Africa, for which I'm not super educated on, so I'm not going to try to claim like I know what's going on. However, you look at all these different pockets of regional war, and this was actually a show that Andrew and I did quite some time ago at this point, but when you start seeing different pockets of regional war, a lot of times what'll end up happening, this is how, again, I'll reference back to our world wars, these pockets of regional fighting start causing bigger powers to step in, whether you're talking about a Russia, China, United States, European nations. You start seeing backers this is how you start to get into the possibility of a world war and not just regional conflict. So I will say, hoping that this ceasefire is actually held to and there could be an agreement reached between these two countries. I'm hoping that this is just a talking point on a show and not a continued case. Do not really want to have to go research the history of another conflict and have to explain to you all why we should be backing one side or another or any side at all in a conflict. I think I already have my hands full with Ukraine and Russia, with Israel Palestine, with really anything that we're getting ourselves involved in. And I would really like to see, backing behind this new pope that I talked about in the beginning of the show. It seemed like one of his biggest messages that he wanted to push was peace. And I would hope that if anything else comes out of this, if nothing else comes out of this, that we can all back, as the people of the world, we can all back a message of peace and try to actually get to a world of peace. Now, there's always going to be some sort of war, some sort of fighting that goes on between nations, maybe even peoples, groups of nations. However, if we can get to a point where these major wars, these major fronts can be dialed back, we can come to some sort of agreement. I think that we are going to head into a calmer phase of living in the world, whereas we've been so ratcheted up over the past, I'll say decades, ever since I've been following politics, which would be sometime around the 2016 election. We have always been talking about wars, whether you're talking about war in the Middle East, whether you're talking about, pulling out of Afghanistan, whether you're talking about the new front that's been opened up between Russia and Ukraine, whether you're talking about the revolution that happened in Ukraine 2014, if you're talking about what's been going on between China and Taiwan, has always been an argument that this could be a war. China and the United States has always been talked about a possible war. I'm tired of hearing about it, and I'm sure that you are too. So if there's anything else that I can end this show on, I'm very, very happy with the current state of where the papacy is, our new pope coming in. I wish him all the best, and I pray that all of us can kind of see that this message of peace, and hoping that this message of peace is really a real one. It's a true one, and that maybe the rest of the world can kind of follow suit in terms of trying to really strive for peace rather than just talk about it. We get to that point, we as a people come to some agreements, agree to disagree, for lack of a better term there, then I think we'll be able to live in a much more stable society. We'll be able to talk with understanding on both sides of every issue, on all sides of every issue, and maybe come to respect that First Amendment, that freedom of speech that we all love to talk about. But when it comes to a time of emergency, we love to get rid of. That's all I got for you today. Again, I am Sal Assante with We The Patriots Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show today, and I will catch you guys again next week. You guys have a wonderful Mother's Day, and I hope that we can all get to a better place by the next time
Wish I
around.
were the fucking state. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.